For those of you who are watching part one, apologies, my computer decided to crash horribly and throw me out of the stream. So let's hoping people can pick up from where we are. So I was talking about issues in the Suez. So if you were running a just-in-time logistics channel and your ship is suddenly diverted around Africa and takes several weeks to get there, certainly in addition to what you're expecting, very quickly that's going to cause problems, particularly if we're not talking about one ship, but many ships and lots of containers. That's going to very quickly be a massive logistical nightmare. But Games Workshop haven't said anything around this, so we don't really know what the decisions are. So it does seem overall, I think, that Games Workshop have, to an extent, they've dropped the ball when it comes to this pre-order, and I think they will have lost quite a few sales. I say this because I think there's going to be quite a few people like me, who could have been tempted at the point of release to have bought a few extra bits. Those while I'm here, go on then. So as I said, I was looking at the main box. I was looking at the Ravening Horde style book. But I could have been tempted to pick a couple of Bretonnian bits. I'm not really thinking about doing Bretonnians, but there's stuff that I can use for other armies. But I'm not going to now go out of my way to try and buy those models again. That moment of, while I'm here, go on then, has passed. So I think there will be those sort of people that they've lost the sales to, and I'm not really thinking here so much about the people who are now going to dive on eBay to try and get things off scalpers, or people that have bought 2 box sets and have a spare rulebook, etc. They're not the people I'm really thinking about here. It's the people that would have bought something, probably would have bought stuff at full RRP, that are now not going to do so. So there we go. So I was fortunate, I think, enough to get hold of the stuff, the minimum stuff I wanted, but I think a lot of people have missed out and are feeling slightly disgruntled about that. But on the positive side, at least we've gone through pre-order day. The game is now coming. It's only 2 weeks away. So after 4 and a bit years of looking forward to this, we're now in a position where there's something very real coming our way. So it's not all horrendous. So where does this bring us in the overall sense of news? I think this is probably a good time to segue into talking about the PDF. The armies, the legacy armies, and the news that they're not going to be Games Workshop tournament legal. And again, this is something which on the absolute eve of the pre-order has caused an amount of upset, which is, I think, a shame. There had been, we've known for a long time that those armies in the PDFs, the legacy armies, they weren't going to see active support. They were going to get their rules day one-ish, but they weren't going to see ongoing support. And a theory had been established that, well, if the game does well, we might start seeing some of these legacy forces starting to get supported, starting to creep back into Warhammer the Old World. And a lot of these armies, we've got to remember, they are supported through Age of Sigmar, albeit in a slightly different way. So it did come as a disappointment when people found out on Friday that not only they're not going to get this support that people, and it's a bit of hopium here, but we're hoping not to, the support they'd hoped for wouldn't be coming, but also they wouldn't be supported for tournaments. Now, of course, we're only talking about Games Workshop tournaments here. Anyone who's not a Games Workshop tournament organizer can do whatever the heck they want. And if they want to include these forces, then absolutely fantastic. Go nuts. Go for it. So I think we will see a large number of tournaments where these forces are allowed. The problem will be coming further down the line, in that as these rules age, as the other factions get more releases, be it the arcane journals, maybe we're going to see proper army books, who knows. But as things start to develop and erratas and FAQs and all that stuff come out the blocks, there's an increasing risk that either power creep will invalidate the PDFs, or issues with balancing will start to come out. Now, it may be that these factions will get weaker and weaker as time goes on. It may be just through some quirk that something becomes absolutely ridiculously powerful. Obviously, we don't know at this point, and it will depend how things go with the balancing and the rules writing going forward. But I can see as time progresses, it'll be more and more difficult to legitimately use these forces in a tournament unless they get a little bit of TLC. I say this, however, of course, the community has quite a good track record, I think, of introducing an element of TLC for itself. And if we look back at 8th edition of Warhammer Fantasy, for example, there were some pretty egregious builds you could do, and some armies which were just so useless by comparison they weren't worth taking. So we got various comp systems that became really widespread, be it extra points for certain units, preventing certain combinations being taken. The community took it on itself to try and fix some of the problems that it found in Warhammer 8th edition. And this, we must remember, was at a time when Games Workshop was an awful lot less engaged with keeping things balanced and fair than it is now. I think Games Workshop is in a lot better position when you look at games like Warhammer 40,000 and what it's doing for Age of Sigmar. The balanced data sheets, keeping things well organized and trying to keep things fair seems a lot higher on its pecking order than it ever was before. So credit has to be given there. But I know, as I say, there's a lot of people disappointed, particularly those who only had an interest in those legacy armies, feeling that the game's perhaps not for them anymore, or was never for them. And it is a shame if people are feeling that way and we're losing members of the community, or potential members of the community, and people we could potentially be playing against or just having conversations with. But I suppose within that, it is what it is to a certain extent, as disappointing as it may be. And personally, I would have loved to have seen Skaven and Dark Elves and Ogre Kingdoms on the tabletop. Some of those factions, Dark Elves, Skaven particularly, have a really long history in Warhammer, and a really big part of what makes the game it is, really, certainly from a lore perspective. So that's pre-order, that's PDFs. Let's talk projects. So I've been talking for a little while across various videos around what my project for 2024 was going to look like. And I was trying to boil down, really, if I could, a particular army I wanted to collect. I got it down to Orcs and Empire, and I asked you good people, what do you think? Which way should I go? And I got some really good inspirational comments, which were both for the Orcs and for the Empire. So it was a fairly even split overall. Some really good arguments put out each way. So it meant I was actually no closer really to making that decision. However, I have been speaking to a few of the people at my local club, and this is where it gets hopefully a little bit more interesting, in that I've managed to gather a group of currently 8 people that are willing to take part in a Tale of 8 Gamers series, a Tale of 8 Warlords. So ahead of pre-release, I asked everyone taking part, what army do you want to collect and why? And we've got quite a good, interesting spread of forces being taken. So we've got a Nurgle themed Warriors of Chaos. the player in question looking to build an army that they wanted to build since they were students, but didn't have the financial firepower at the time in order to do so. So this is a chance for them to build that army they always wanted. We've got an experienced tournament player from the back in the days of Warhammer Fantasy, and he's going to be bringing dwarves to the table. The rationale here is when he was younger, he had a dwarf army and a squat army. He's picked up Votans for Warhammer 40,000, so he's now venturing into the world of dwarves to again take him back to his childhood. So this nostalgia theme really starting to come through. We've got a Wood Elf player. A Wood Elf player because he really likes the lore, loves the models, and really excited to dive into those sort of figures. And it'll be interesting to see what happens when Wood Elves go live as part of Warhammer Old World. Again, looking at love of the models, we have a Tomb King player. And in addition to that, we have some Bretonnians, I think. That's not been 100% confirmed, but I think we're going to have a Bretonnian player who also happens to be someone who has their own YouTube channel. Now, I was hoping to get them on the channel today to have a bit of a discussion around the rationale behind their choices. Fortunately, life just gets in the way again sometimes, and they weren't able to make it. Hopefully, on a future show, we'll have Epic Flail on to have a bit of a conversation and to share the stories around collecting their force. So we'll see what we can do with that. And rounding out our list, we have High Elves and a second unit or second army of dwarves, this time based on the fact that the player in question has some dwarves already, so it's able to make a start on building their army. So what is the aim for all of this? Well, one of the players in question is in part of Incursion events, and they host regular tournaments down in Lancing in Sussex. And on the 29th of June, there's going to be a Warhammer, the Old World tournament. So the idea is, between us, we're putting our armies together, and we're going to look to hopefully take our forces and test them out at this particular summer event. So we know that for a game that's probably going to require about 2,000 points of troops, we need to crack on and get organised for our forces. Now, you may have noticed that one of the things I haven't done is told you about the force I'm going to be taking. And I've decided I'm going to go with Empire, sort of. And the reason I've gone with Empire is, on reflection, I found it far easier to think of stories that I want to tell than I could with Orcs and Goblins. Orcs and Goblins, you kind of have the sort of idea of rise of your war boss as he tries to fight his way to the top, but ultimately beyond that, and to make it different, to make it interesting, I was struggling a little bit. Whereas stories around characters for the Empire, they just come a little bit more to mind. And for me, having a narrative to the army is really important. It's one of the things that makes me excited to collect an army and to develop it. And my last few armies, I've struggled to really get this connection. I've built an army, I've thrown it together against lists. I've struggled to really form a connection to the force that I've wanted to collect. So I did have to go with that with the Dwarf Army I was collecting last year and the year before. But now's the time to really, I think, kick in, because we've got a group of people taking part. There's a set of rules that we can play smaller games to, and hopefully I'll get a chance to test out my forces as it builds, so it can write its own story as we go. What is the story? Well, twofold, really. One of the things I was quite interested in is the idea of the moot. Now, by the time Warhammer the Old World is set, the Time of Legends, I think as Games Workshop are referring to it as, the Moot is part of the Empire. So I think there's a story to be told here from a halfling perspective. So I've come up with the idea of Thrumple Hairytoe. Now, Thrumple isn't a particularly powerful warrior. He's not a great general. He's just a member of the burgeoning middle classes with a particular gift. And he's got the gift of the gab. He's really good at taking other people with him with his ideas. And what Thrumple believes in, being quite politically minded, is he doesn't really like the idea of the Moot being part of the wider empire. He wants the homeland for the halflings to be fully independent. So with that, he has set about gathering a small band of troops to form his Revolutionary Guard. But Thrumple, being relatively sensible, knows that he's probably too much of a small fish to achieve much by himself, and what he needs are allies. And he'll take his allies pretty much where he can get them. He's taken really an alliance with a very minor imperial noble to work together to improve both of their positions. I think it's important when talking about these sort of narratives that the characters you invent don't overreach themselves. So we know a lot of the characters that exist, particularly the powerful ones, because they're recorded in the lore already. And once you start interacting with them and interacting with known histories, it becomes a little bit trickier, I think, to expand the characters in a sort of a natural way, because you start interfering with established laws, where taking people a bit lower down the pecking order, a minor noble who, all right, he might be a little bit nasty, a little bit more brutal, a little bit better trained, smarter, whatever it may be than his immediate neighbours, he's not really going to affect the established law that's going around with the game, because, well, if he did start to overreach himself, someone bigger and more powerful than him would slap him down pretty quickly, and that would be that. And it also means you're not then tied into these particularly glamorous battles or huge feats of daring do. It just feels a little bit more realistic to be having someone scratching around the edges and just trying to further their own ambitions. So the idea is then, with all this army collecting, is I'm hoping to be able to do some kind of monthly update as to how everyone's getting on. Hopefully get some pictures of people once we start to come together and units getting painted and based. Maybe a couple of stories from the battlefield as well. So not sure if any of the players are amongst those watching the chat. If so, if you want to, do give us a wave and let me know if you're here and what your thoughts are for your first unit. For me, I've taken the liberty of going out to pick up some halflings. So I've picked up actually a box from Kings of War. Their halfling army comes with 40 infantry, 20 cavalry, character, and whatever the war machine type thing is. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think that will cross over particularly well into Warhammer the Old World, but this gives me a good starting point. I'll get some state trooper type units. I'm thinking some halberds with some missile weapon support, some cavalry I can use either as pistoliers or heavy cavalry. Halfling heavy cavalry does certainly sound like an amusing option. And then I've got a wizard riding a large dog, which could be quite fun to see how I wrap that up into the story. So that is going to be the project for the first 6 months at least of 2023. 2024. Hopefully you're all as excited as I am to actually get going with your projects. Do let me know if you've got anything particularly going at the moment. Otherwise, really, just to say, I think despite the issues that have been faced around release, the pre-orders, and the upset that's been caused, we've got something coming. It's just around the corner. And for that, I think there's a definite positive and something to look forward to getting into. All that remains really for me to say now is thank you very much for those who have been watching this live stream. May well do some more in the future. It depends how I think this particular project continues, whether it's successful, whether we can keep the players engaged. Hopefully we can. And I will see you all for the next video. Thank you very much.